everyone, Steve Matthews here. Thanks for joining me today for episode 2 of our look at John Robbins' book titled Ecclesiastical Megalomania. I'm going to title this episode Introduction Part 2, because we're not going to get into the meat of the book today, but there's some additional introductory issues that I wanted to bring out for you. Just to kind of recap what we talked about last time, let me get the book up here. This is the book that we're talking about, Ecclesiastical Megalomania. We talked some about the title. Now, those two words there, ecclesiastical and megalomania, those aren't words that we typically use in our everyday life, for most of us. And so I wanted to define them a little bit. As you may recall from our discussion last time, the word ecclesiastical means of or related to a church. And megalomania means delusion of grandeur. So when you put those two ideas together, you're talking about a delusion of grandeur that is of or related to a church. And in this particular case, we're talking about a delusion of grandeur specific to the Roman Catholic Church. And the delusion of grandeur relates to the economic and political thought of the Roman Catholic Church. You can see that that's the subtitle there. This particular picture on the front, I think, really relates very nicely both to the title of the book as well as to the overall content of the book. Now, you may recognize this photo. Many of you may recognize this as Pope John Paul II. He was a pope for quite a good number of years, I think about 25 years, maybe even a little. I don't remember exactly how long, but it was close to 25 years. It was over 20 years. I know he was elected in 1979. He was pope throughout the 1980s, 1990s, and into the 2000s. And you might look down here and you can see this. Here's the seal of the United Nations. And this photograph was actually taken in 1995 when Pope John Paul II came to the United Nations General Assembly in New York City and addressed the General Assembly. And there's a description, I think it's really a press release that was put out at the time in 1995. And let me just read this to you here, give you a little context of that photo. John Paul II visited the United Nations today at the invitation of Secretary General Boutros Ghali and addressed the General Assembly at 11 a.m. During his stay at the UN, the Pope met high government leaders attending the General Assembly session. He was greeted by a group of children from the UN International School dressed in national costumes who sang "Let There Be Peace on Earth." He gave a separate address to the staff of the UN Secretariat and spoke briefly to representatives of the press and to non-governmental organizations, as well as to UN delegates and dignitaries. The visit of the Pope is the third papal visit to the UN. John Paul II previously visited the UN on October 2, 1979, at the invitation of then Secretary General Kurt Waldheim. The late Paul VI visited the UN on October 4, 1965, at the invitation of then Secretary General U Thant. Now, I mentioned last time that this book was originally published in 1999, and that was 21 years ago. It's hard to believe that it's been that long. We're recording this in April of 2020. And subsequent to John Paul's 1990 visit, there have actually been 2 additional papal visits to the UN. The next time a pope visited the UN was on April 18th, 2008. Of course, that was Benedict XVI. And after that, the most recent papal visit to the UN took place on September 25th, 2015, and that was by Francis I, the current pope. Now, the UN and the Vatican have long had a especially close relationship. They're both globalist organizations, and as such, I think that they both see in one another certainly some common interests. And what I'd like to do is to actually jump ahead a bit. And I'm actually going to read to you a little bit from a chapter toward the end of the book on world government. You know, a lot of people don't realize this, but the Roman Catholic Church is openly promoting world government. It has for a very long time. But yet it's not something that's really ever discussed that much in the press. And we'll come back to that thought in a minute here, but I wanted to just read a few paragraphs here for you from Ecclesiastical Megalomania. This is John Robbins writing. In the judgment of the Roman Church state, the United Nations is, at the present time, the likeliest vehicle to achieve the political and economic world unification that the Roman Church state desires. The Church state has been lavish in its moral support of the United Nations. John the 23rd referred to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as, quote, an act of the highest importance performed by the United Nations organization, approved in the General Assembly of December 10th, 1948. Ayn Rand was right when she wrote in 1967, quote, the Catholic Church has never given up the hope to reestablish the medieval union of church and state, with a global state and a global theocracy as its ultimate goal. So there you have it. Now, one of the great frustrations that I have as a Christian and really just as a student of world affairs, I've always been interested in politics and in economics and things like world affairs, is on the one hand, the Roman Catholic Church is very openly globalist. I mean, you hear popes and very high-ranking officials in the church come out and just constantly advocate for world government. Yeah, I mean, they're basically in your face. You can't miss these guys. You know, it's like they almost like say, "Oh, world government, you know, we're down with that." You know, that's the way they are. They love world government, and they can't go very long without talking about it. And you find this. I mean, watch for yourself when you see a pope or some other high church official talking, how often they talk about world government and international cooperation and things of this sort. It's constant. You almost have to willfully miss it. And of course, you know, the mainstream media rarely, if ever, talks about this. Now, I'm not really very surprised because most of what the mainstream media talks about is most of what they teach is lies. I mean, there's very little in the mainstream media that's at all helpful. I mean, you can watch the mainstream media for years and you will never learn about the globalist ambitions of the Roman Catholic Church, or the Roman Church state, as John Robbins likes to refer to it here in Ecclesiastical Megalomania. Now, you might wonder why he calls it the Roman Catholic Church state. Well, the reason is because it's both a church organization, or purports to be a church anyway, but it's also a political organization. It is a state. The Roman Catholic Church, the official diplomatic name for it is internationally is the Holy See. And the Roman Catholic Church has diplomatic relations with something like 170 some nations in the world, including the United States. The United States both sends and receives ambassadors to the Holy See and from the Holy See. That started in 1984 under President Ronald Reagan, and in fact, John Robbins talks about that in the book, and we'll cover that in a future episode, Lord willing. But the thing that's interesting, too, about coverage of the globalist ambitions of the Roman Church state and of the popes of Rome is not only does the mainstream media miss it, but really the alternate media completely misses it, too. And when I talk about the alternate media, I'm talking here about independent bloggers, YouTubers, podcasters, people who do a lot of the work like what I do, whether writing blogs or making videos or podcasts. And you might think that they would pick up on this stuff because they don't have corporate masters they have to please and advertisers and such like. But there's really very little understanding even among the alternate media of just how aggressively globalist the Roman Catholic Church is. It's you can't miss this stuff, or you shouldn't be able to. But people seem to, and I don't know why there's not more discussion of it. You hear people get on and they talk about various globalist organizations. They talk about the Council on Foreign Relations, or they talk about George Soros or Davos, the Bilderberg Group, or the Rothschilds, or people of this sort. Now, and these are all globalists of one sort or another, but they always usually seem to leave out the ambitions of the popes and of the Roman Church state. And maybe some of that is just blindness. I think it was the Apostle Paul spoke about the Jews in the first century. He talked about when they read the Old Testament, there's a veil over their hearts. And it almost seems as though there's a veil over the hearts of the people who report on international affairs. They don't seem to recognize just how aggressive Rome is in its globalism. So maybe that's one explanation, is that they don't see it. Another explanation is maybe they do see it and they're afraid to talk about it. Yeah, and I think that that probably describes at least some people. Yeah, and it's hard to know what's always the case, but I think that's some of what's going on. And one of the purposes that I have in doing this particular video series is I want to talk about what Rome teaches in terms of its politics, in terms of its economics, and how it influences politics, both domestically in individual countries as well as internationally. Rome is a very aggressive globalist organization. It's critical that you understand that. Well, that's about all for today for our introduction part 2. Thanks so much for watching. Appreciate that, and look forward to seeing you again next time. Goodbye.